There is a moment in the life cycle of an economic superpower when the metrics of success begin to mask a deeper structural unraveling. For the first time in generations, a major capital can be seen functioning perfectly as a global brand while systematically collapsing as a living city. The official data paints a picture of unprecedented vitality, showing a record-breaking influx of international capital and global foot traffic. Yet, beneath this glossy exterior lies a profound demographic and economic reversal. The surface grandeur remains intact, framed in marble and ancient stone, but the foundational systems that sustain actual human habitation are quietly eroding. This is the reality confronting Rome today. For 2 millennia, this geography served as the literal and administrative anchor of the Western world. Every major trade artery converged here. Every subsequent empire measured its institutional permanence against the scale of what was constructed across these 7 hills. The Colosseum, the Pantheon, the Forum, these structures were so massive and architecturally advanced that medieval observers genuinely believed they were the work of a vanished race of giants. For centuries, the world traveled to this destination not merely to examine ruins, but to witness tangible proof that human institutional ambition could achieve permanence. Today, the surface narrative remains flawless. The city records over 30 million international visitors annually, generating staggering hospitality metrics that suggest an economy at its peak. If an observer relies solely on official press releases and tourism boards, the conclusion would be that the municipal core has never been more robust. However, a closer examination of the internal data and the testimonies of multi-generational residents reveals a starkly different trajectory. It is a chronicle of slow, systemic erosion, a major metropolis hollowing out its productive sectors to become a preserved museum of its former self. This is the documentation of an empire falling a second time, not to external forces, but to an internal, institutional paralysis. To understand the mechanics of this modern contraction, one must analyze the baselines established during the height of the classical era. In the 2nd century AD, the urban center managed a population estimated between 1 and 2 million residents, making it the largest concentrated human settlement on the planet. This population was sustained by an intricate network of running water, subterranean heating systems, a centralized postal infrastructure, and public legal institutions sophisticated enough to serve as the blueprint for modern constitutional democracies. The physical engineering was so advanced that portions of these ancient aqueducts, bridges, and roadways remain integrated into the regional infrastructure today. Yet, this historical peak reveals the primary structural vulnerability that modern planners consistently overlook. The very scale of the infrastructure required to maintain such an advanced civilization creates an exponential compounding of maintenance costs and logistical dependencies. The moment the central authority faces financial or administrative strain, the systemic decline accelerates far more rapidly than contemporary observers predict. The classical network required flawless maritime control over North Africa and Egypt to secure the grain supply. It required a massive standing military to protect thousands of miles of trade routes, and it required continuous, intensive labor to maintain the aqueducts feeding the urban core. The empire was, fundamentally, a highly complex machine, and systems of that scale do not experience gradual, linear depreciation. When the Western administrative structure officially dissolved in 476 AD, it was not the result of a sudden, single catastrophic event. Historians trace the actual collapse to a process that began more than 2 centuries prior, driven by the systematic debasement of the currency, a contracting municipal tax base, regional plagues that emptied the agricultural hinterlands, and severe political paralysis at the center. During the 3rd century crisis, the administrative core cycled through more than 20 rulers in a span of just 50 years. The collapse was an incremental, nearly imperceptible accumulation of structural schulst until the final emperor occupied a throne that possessed no actual regulatory authority over a territory that had ceased to exist as an economic reality. Modern municipal data indicates that the contemporary capital is repeating this exact cycle of structural neglect. Currently governing a population of approximately 2.8 million residents within the city proper, it stands as the political capital of the Eurozone's 4th largest economy. It anchors some of the most lucrative cultural assets globally, yet by every metric essential to a functioning modern metropolis, the city is failing to support its internal population. The primary indicator of this failure is found in the modern transit network. The municipal metro system remains one of the smallest and least efficient of any major European capital relative to geographic size and population density. For decades, the network has been crippled by emergency station closures, systemic flooding, and chronic operational delays. Why is this transit deficit so exceptionally large? The explanation is structural. Driven by a unique collision of fiscal deficits and archaeological density, municipal construction teams cannot break ground anywhere within the urban perimeter without intercepting ancient topography, be it a buried necropolis, an intact mosaic floor, or a forgotten aqueduct section. Consequently, every attempt to expand the underground transit network triggers mandatory, long-term interventions by state archaeological authorities, halting infrastructure development for months or years. A modern city is literally suspended above its own history, and the sheer physical and regulatory weight of that history renders the creation of modern public utilities nearly impossible. The surface transit infrastructure reflects a similar level of decay. The municipal roadways are defined by severe asphalt degradation, resulting in thousands of documented potholes that cause significant vehicular damage and systemic safety hazards annually. The municipal maintenance budget is consistently inadequate to address the scale of the deterioration. The historic cobblestones, highly effective for visual marketing, are structurally unsuited for the volume and weight of the heavy commercial touristas that traverse them continuously, simultaneously. Waste management has deteriorated into a permanent civic crisis. The Municipal Waste Management Entity, AMA, has remained severely encumbered by hundreds of millions of euros in debt, structural mismanagement, and chronic labor disputes. The regional waste-to-energy infrastructure is profoundly inadequate, forcing the municipality to export significant percentages of its daily refuse to other Italian regions and foreign processing plants at an immense fiscal cost. Internal planning documents from 2022 reveal that the core issue is not a lack of political intent, but an institutional inertia so deeply embedded within the municipal bureaucracy that even aggressive administrative reforms are neutralized by overlapping jurisdictions. A single infrastructure decision routinely requires separate authorizations from 6 distinct government departments, none of which possess the staffing levels required to process data within a modern economic timeframe. While the domestic population navigates this systemic breakdown, the global marketing apparatus continues to operate with absolute efficiency. The 30 million annual consumers are presented with a highly curated, unchanging aesthetic. The illuminated forum at dusk, commercial hospitality stands, and historic plazas preserved precisely as they appeared a century ago. This represents the most historically sophisticated marketing operation in existence. Selling an idealized myth that dates back to the state-commissioned literature of the Augustan era, the critical economic question is whether a myth can indefinitely sustain a metropolitan economy when the physical infrastructure beneath it is fundamentally fractured. The data suggests that the line between tourism management and total economic surrender has been crossed. Short-term holiday rentals within the historic center have experienced exponential growth over the past decade, leaving the capital with one of the highest concentrations of non-residential real estate properties in Europe. The systemic consequence of this real estate shift is the rapid, measurable evacuation of the native population from the urban core. The financial incentive is absolute. A property owner can generate more revenue in 3 weeks from short-term international travelers than in 3 months from a domestic, long-term tenant. As a direct result, local commercial businesses, neighborhood food markets, and civic spaces are systematically replaced by high-turnover tourist hospitality venues selling low-quality, imported souvenirs. Entire historic quarters, which for generations maintained distinct working-class identities and self-sustaining local economies, have been thoroughly converted into consumption zones. Residential demographic data shows a steep, unbroken decline in the permanent population of the central districts, transforming a living metropolis into a highly commercialized theme park. This domestic displacement exposes the first major structural crack in the city's modern survival strategy, revealing a systemic vulnerability that threatens to sever the capital entirely from its domestic economic base. But the structural transformation of a living capital into a commercial consumption zone is only the visible surface of a much deeper institutional unraveling. Behind the shuttered storefronts of the historic center lies a severe regional economic divergence that is quietly draining the capital of its productive capacity. Wow. While mainstream economic reporting frequently bundles the Italian peninsula into a singular narrative of stagnation, the internal data reveals a sharp internal polarization. The financial, intellectual, and industrial gravity of the nation has shifted decisively northward, leaving the political capital increasingly isolated, dependent on state subsidies and low-wage hospitality industries. To measure the depth of this economic retreat, one must look at the stark contrast between Rome and Milan. For the past 3 decades, Milan has successfully positioned itself as the undisputed engine of the national economy, capturing the vast majority of international direct investment, corporate headquarters, and high-tech startups. The Lombardy region operates with an export-driven, highly efficient corporate infrastructure, while the Lazio region, anchored by Rome, remains heavily burdened by a bloated public sector and an over-reliance on tourist foot traffic. The private sector in the capital is remarkably thin. Corporate registries indicate that out of the country's top 100 largest companies, fewer than 15 maintain true operational headquarters in Rome, and those that do are predominantly state-owned energy or defense conglomerates. Why is this economic divide so exceptionally large? The systemic cause lies in the complete failure of the capital to transition into a knowledge-based economy. During the tech boom of the late 2010s and early 2020s, municipal leaders frequently announced initiatives to establish Rome as a Mediterranean tech hub. Yet, the corporate data from 2025 and 2026 confirms that the venture capital flowing into Roman startups is less than 1/10 of the volume entering Milan. The local ecosystem lacks the institutional agility required to foster innovation. A tech firm attempting to secure commercial licensing or zoning approvals in Rome faces an administrative maze that averages 14 months to navigate, compared to less than 40 days in Lombardy. The immediate casualty of this corporate starvation is the city's human capital. The demographic data presents a bleak trajectory of systemic brain drain. Every year, the world-class faculties of the Sapienza University of Rome graduate thousands of highly trained engineers, data scientists, and corporate strategists. Yet, the employment tracking registries reveal that over 65% of these graduates leave the region within 24 months of receiving their degrees. They do not merely move abroad. They migrate to the northern industrial corridors, or to secondary European capitals where corporate structures offer upward mobility. The sensory reality of this youth exodus is written across the outer neighborhoods of the city. In districts like San Lorenzo or Garbatella, which once hummed with the energy of political movements, student collectives, and young professionals, the change is palpable. One notices the absence of new commercial investments, the silence in the plazas during working hours, and the ubiquity of handwritten "for rent" or "for sale" signs taped to the iron shutters of vacant storefronts. The population that remains is disproportionately aging, real estate wealthy but cash poor, or entirely dependent on municipal public sector payrolls that are themselves deeply insolvent. This demographic imbalance has triggered a profound crisis within the city's fiscal architecture. A municipality cannot maintain a multi-billion euro historical footprint and a crumbling transit network when its tax base is composed primarily of pensioners, low-wage tour guides, and public administration clerks. The tax revenues generated by the hospitality sector are notoriously leaky, often routed through multinational digital platforms or absorbed by a massive informal cash economy that evades municipal enforcement. Internal audits from the Rome municipality indicate that tax evasion in the local commercial sector hovers around 22%, nearly double the rate of northern Italian cities. The industry-level impact of this total reliance on tourism is most visible in the complete degradation of the local labor market. The jobs being created in Rome right now are not high-value, wealth-generating positions. They are precarious, seasonal hospitality roles. The proliferation of short-term vacation rentals has created a vast subterranean gig economy of laundry workers, cleaners, and digital key managers who operate without contract stability, health benefits, or meaningful wages. Labor union data from recent quarters shows that the average entry-level wage for a service worker in Rome's historic center has stagnated in real terms for over a decade. Even as the cost of living and local rents have escalated by over 40%, This economic distortion has broken the traditional contract between the city and its middle class. For generations, a stable Roman life was built on small-scale commerce, specialized craftsmanship, or professional services. Today, those pathways are entirely blocked by the economics of hypertourism. A multi-generational leather artisan in the Prati district or a family-owned typography shop near the Campo de' Fiori cannot compete with the skyrocketing commercial rents driven by international hospitality groups. When these local institutions close, they do not reopen elsewhere. Their spaces are immediately converted into automated luggage storage lockers or generic mini-markets designed exclusively for transient consumption. The result is a highly fragile, monoculture economy that possesses zero resilience against global shocks. The systemic vulnerability of this model was laid bare during the early 2020s, when the sudden cessation of international travel caused an immediate, devastating contraction of the city's gross domestic product, far outpacing the national average. Yet, rather than diversifying in the wake of that crisis, the municipal's administration doubled down on the tourist myth, fast-tracking approvals for luxury hotel conversions and international resort chains. The historic center is being systematically re-engineered to serve a wealthy, transient global elite, while the actual citizens are pushed further into the neglected, infrastructure-starved peripheral zones beyond the Grande Raccordo Anulare Highway. This spatial segregation is creating a deep, structural alienation within the citizenry. The people who clean the monuments, serve the food, and maintain the hotels are forced to commute up to 2 hours each day on unreliable, non-air-conditioned regional buses, because the central residential zones have become financially inaccessible to them. The historic core has effectively ceased to function as a civic space for the people of Rome. It is a stage set where the actors are temporary visitors, and the caretakers live in exile on the urban margins. The continuity of Roman civic life, which survived the collapse of antiquity, the Dark Ages, and world wars, is being quietly severed by the invisible hand of an unchecked hospitality market. Yet, the most surprising layer of this institutional retreat remains completely hidden within the psychological paralysis of the state itself. Behind these clinical economic statistics are real human lives being radically reshaped, their daily routines dictated by the accelerating retreat of a functional society. The physical hollowing out of the capital is not an abstract metric on a spreadsheet. It is an intimate, exhausting reality experienced by the families who are watching their hometown transform into an unlivable landscape. To live in contemporary Rome is to experience a unique form of cognitive dissonance, navigating an urban environment that is globally celebrated for its timeless beauty, while privately enduring the slow-motion collapse of every basic municipal service required for a dignified life. Consider the daily reality of the transit workers and commuters who anchor the city's peripheral ring. In the vast residential blocks of Tor Bella Monaca and Cinecittà, miles away from the manicured pathways of the historic core, the sensory evidence of neglect is overwhelming. Here, the absence of public investment is measured in the heavy, stagnant air of unventilated subway cars that routinely break down between stations, forcing thousands of low-wage workers to complete their commutes on foot along unlit suburban highways. The multi-hour daily journey to reach the luxury hotels and restaurants of the center has become a psychological tax on the working class. It is a grueling routine that leaves no time for community engagement, civic organizing, or family life, effectively fracturing the social fabric of the outer boroughs. The human cost is equally severe for the younger generation of Romans, who choose to resist the pressure to migrate northward. For an educated professional under 40, attempting to build a career in the capital is an exercise in systemic frustration. The local economy operates largely on a network of entrenched nepotism and public administration patronage, a stagnant system where advancement is tied to institutional connections rather than merit or innovation. Those who refuse to leave are forced into a state of prolonged adolescence, unable to secure independent housing due to a real estate market completely warped by short-term tourist platforms and trapped in low-paying, entry-level positions that offer no clear trajectory for growth. The quiet rooms of parental apartments across the city are filled with highly qualified adults holding advanced degrees, working remotely for foreign firms or surviving on irregular freelance contracts, existing as economic ghosts in their own city. In the older, historic neighborhoods, the loss is experienced as a profound sensory deprivation. Multi-generational residents describe a specific melancholy silence that descends upon their buildings as the long-term tenants are systematically replaced by the silent digital keyboxes of vacation rentals, the familiar sounds of neighborhood life. The morning greetings across interior courtyards, the children playing in the piazzas, the localized accents of neighborhood tradespeople, have been replaced by the uniform, rhythmic rolling of hard-shell suitcases on cobblestones. The social safety net of the traditional Italian neighborhood, built on mutual reliance and daily face-to-face interaction, has withered. When an elderly resident can no longer walk down to a local market because the shop has been converted into a high-end boutique, and when their neighbors are entirely transient tourists who change every 3 days, the result is an intense, unmitigated isolation. This systemic displacement has successfully broken the multi-generational continuity that defined Roman identity for centuries. The unique cultural resilience of the city always resided in its ability to absorb historical trauma while maintaining its essential character at the neighborhood level. Wars, regime changes, and economic depressions were endured because the core communities remained anchored to their physical geography. The current crisis, however, is executing a far more permanent erasure. By pricing out the young, isolating the elderly, and converting the physical spaces of collective memory into commercialized stages, the market is effectively dismantling the living culture that made the city eternal. The institutional response to this human emergency is characterized by a profound, paralyzing fatalism. When confronted with the evidence of this demographic collapse, municipal administrators and regional planners routinely invoke the weight of history as an insurmountable obstacle, adopting a posture of passive stewardship over an unmanageable monument rather than active governance of a living metropolis. The state has essentially internalized the myth of its own permanence, operating under the dangerous assumption that because Rome has survived for 2,000 years, it will inherently survive this current era of structural rot. This psychological paralysis ensures that every proposed policy remains superficial, avoiding the radical structural interventions required to regulate the hospitality monopolies or rebuild the municipal tax base. This reality brings the entire narrative of urban decline full circle, revealing a sobering truth that connects the ancient fall with the contemporary unraveling. The ultimate tragedy of a decaying superpower is not that it ceases to exist, but that it forgets how to be alive. The monumental stone architecture, the massive marble columns, the grand triumphal arches, the sprawling imperial plazas is entirely deceptive. These structures do not represent the current health of a civilization. They are merely the durable skeletons of an ambition that has long since vanished. The eternal city is not enduring in a state of vibrant, forward-looking permanence. Instead, it is gradually settling into its final role as a magnificent, melancholic stage set, an extraordinary, hollowed-out artifact